Alright guys, about 6 months ago at the Game Awards, Elden Ring Nightreign was announced. And to be fair, this is a game that at the time I was pretty interested in. And before anybody hits like or dislike or starts to spurg out my comments, I am not here to tell you that the game is a disaster, a failure, that it's, an abomination. I have not played it. I'm still interested in playing it. I'm just covering the news all around it and trying to make sense, make heads or tails out of this entire debacle. So, that being said, the game has now released, and as you can see by articles like this from Gamatsu, it has sold a lot of copies. Elden Ring Nightreign shipments and digital sales top 2 million in one day. Now, what is Elden Ring Nightreign? Elden Ring Nightreign is a 3-person co-op survival 3-night situation where you have to, again, go through 3 nights of enemies and bosses to essentially win. It's like, some have described it as Elden Ring and Fortnite having a baby. That's not entirely, the best way to describe it because, again, Fortnite is PvP, whereas this is entirely PvE co-op. Now, that being said, the game still looks fun. It looks like it could really be a blast, but people have had legitimate criticisms, some that I'm not so worried about, some that I think are a lot bigger issues. Despite all those things, though, the game is doing phenomenally well. The game has already had a concurrent player count on Steam alone of more than 300,000 players in the first 60 minutes, which, as you can see from Games Radar Plus, has eclipsed the entire Dark Souls trilogy combined. Mind-blowing numbers. This game is doing phenomenally well. It'll probably hit 5 million sales in the first, month? Maybe the first couple of weeks, who even knows at this point? Again, this is the funniest thing because we're so used to Ubisoft and a lot of other companies saying players instead of sales. But here they are, they're coming out and just straight up saying it, 2 million sales in the first day. Mind-blowing numbers. And as you can see though, there are some problems. If you look at SteamDB, you can see those current players, again, 275,000 currently playing it right now on Saturday night. The all-time peak was 2 days ago when it released at 313,000. Now, these numbers will change, obviously, as more people play the game and as, they fix some bugs and some issues and add some quality of life features and all that. The concerning thing, though, is it's now Saturday night. You'd think that, the weekend, given the fact the game released on a Thursday, we'd be seeing higher peaks than 2 days ago. That hasn't happened. In fact, the numbers are going down, which is a little bit of a concerning trend, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. The other concern, as I'm sure you've seen by this big yellow number here, 66.56% positive reviews. That means that roughly 1/3 of the reviews for this game are negative, which is mind-blowing for a Souls-type game. And again, I'm not the biggest Souls guy. I have beaten Elden Ring, and I am not the first person to be like, get good, you suck at games, don't play Elden Ring if you're not great at games. I had to use summons. I have no qualms saying that. But I did have to overcome a lot of obstacles along the way, especially with Dark Souls 3 playing on Xbox. I didn't have anybody to play with, so I did have to overcome quite a bit of that on my own. Again, get good, right? It's a tongue-in-cheek phrase. That being said, there are a lot of other concerns people have about the difficulty of this game alone, not just because it's a Souls game, but because there are certain features that it just needs to implement. So from Polygon here, it says Elden Ring Nightreign is hard for completely different reasons than Elden Ring. Well, what are they talking about? From Forbes, Elden Ring Nightreign players realize there's no comms, no duos, and no crossplay. These are those quality of life features that I think are worth talking about. Now, the comms thing, I don't actually think is that big of a deal when it comes to actual communication devices, like being able to do talk to text or text speech or voice chat or whatever. I would like to be able to use maybe text chat in the game. But again, when you're playing Elden Ring and you summon people, you can't talk to them, they can't talk to you. You just kind of get used to that being a feature. It's a feature, not a bug, in Souls-type games, in games from FromSoft. That being said, these games have had a long history of not being quote-unquote accessible enough, as Alana Pierce so eloquently pointed out a couple of years ago, last year I believe it was.
There are also multiple kinds of disabilities, especially where gaming is concerned. There are long-term disabilities. There are situational disabilities, there are temporary disabilities. It counts as a disability where a video game like Elden Ring is concerned if you have a kid. You have a 2-year-old, you're trying to play Elden Ring, you can't pause. That is a situational disability that you have.
But aside from that, we've also heard criticisms about not enough black hairstyles. There's been some ridiculous conversations around the Souls genre as a whole. These other two things, though, no duos and no crossplay, I think are a much bigger cause for concern or necessarily complaints, if you will. not having the option to play duos, but you can play solo or trios, makes it to where a lot of people are not enjoying the game as much as they possibly could, because a lot of people might have one person, one friend to play with, one dependable ally that they know they can count on to play the game with them. They don't have two. And when you start to mix in that third person who might screw things up for you down the road, and you can't communicate with them in the first place because there's no way to communicate in the game, and then you add on the fact that there's no crossplay, so if you do have a friend but they're on a different platform, you can't include them in your trio, it becomes a much bigger issue for a lot of players. Elden Ring Nightreign is immediately FromSoft's worst reviewed game on Steam. This is not the Elden Ring you're looking for. Now, I'm going to discount this article because this is written by Joshua Wollens over at PC Gamer, who in the first line says, "Can I make a confession? I still haven't finished Elden Ring. In fact, I've yet to make it much further than Margit." For this reason alone, I'm going to throw this article out and say I'm not even going to bother looking through it. But there are some legitimate complaints that one of the top most recommended reviews on Steam right now, from somebody who's played 11 and a half hours on Steam, has to say. He says, of course, this game's great. The new bosses are fantastic. If you're a diehard Souls fan, of course, it's worth the buy. The music's beautiful. I adore the characters. A lot of good here. Great foundations. But there's more work to be done for the average player. Again, he brings up a lot of key issues that I think are worth talking about. No new weaponry. Very little new content. It's basically an asset flip of Elden Ring, which was expected, and FromSoft didn't try to hide that. However, you'd expect at least some new gear and enemies. So far, only starting weapons for characters are new-ish, meaning that there are new weapons, spells, incantations, or weapon arts to pick up in the world. There isn't even the new weapons or enemies from the Elden Ring DLC besides one minor demi-human mob. Extremely poor communication tools, we've already talked about that. You can put a marker down on the map, and that's about the limitation of your communication. So you can put a marker. Okay, so that's about it. Now again, I am less hung up on the lack of communication, mainly because I'm used to playing solo or with, people's chat muted anyways. I just tend to not even pay attention to what anybody else around me is saying. So that's not such a big deal for me, but I get it. That's an annoyance for a lot of people. Overly strong encouragement for group play. This one's interesting because, again, this goes back to the idea that you can either queue solo or with 3 randoms, and you're stuck again with whoever you get. It's like the luck of the draw. It's a rough experience for new players, lack of progression, the game's difficulty, hard even for the first boss set, is going to be a serious barrier of entry to new players. We're all here for difficulty, but for a healthy multiplayer-only game to survive, it needs to be able to ease players in. The game expects much of you to already be familiar with the enemies and weapons from Elden Ring, and the UI struggles to properly show what spells, buffs, and weapons arts do. And of course, it says there's a limited sense of progression, limited customization for runs, paid characters. Of course, this is the deluxe edition, which implies future characters will with cash. I'm sure that there's other ways to unlock them in the game. Massively inflated health pools. Again, a lot of key issues that are brought up in this review. Of course, we've seen some articles saying that they'll address some of these issues. Elden Ring Nightreign's next patch will make gameplay easier for solo players. This is from Engadget. The second patch for FromSoftware's latest title has already sold 2 million copies. Again, it's an amazing feat. It's an incredible feat. But it says that the game's developer posted on X that patch 1.02 will be released next week, delivering some bug fixes and improvements for solo expeditions. More specifically, FromSoftware will add the effect of automatic revival upon defeat that allows a self-revival once per night boss battle for solo expeditions. I think that's a pretty cool idea, because again, if you're playing by yourself, you're already making the game more difficult than you would if you had a full trio. Why not give them one self-revive per match? Of course, we've seen this tweet from Pirate Nation saying, Elden Ring Nightreign, Dark Souls 4 died for this. Legendary Drops took exception to that and said it was made by a second team, reusing assets turned around in 2 years, meant as a way to experiment and give junior leadership experience. I genuinely don't understand why people are tripping over this. And there is some truth to what he's saying here. I would just say that there's a lot of people who would look at this and say if it was made by a different studio, if it was Ubisoft making a Assassin's Creed survival trios game where you have to survive for 3 days or whatever, and they reused a bunch of assets, people would be crapping all over them left and right. So I do think that that is a legitimate point to make. However, he does bring up something interesting, and that is the fact that they are trying to train up their junior developers and, of course, try to, promote people to the forefront by using this game as essentially a project, a safe project for some of these developers to experiment with. I mean, let's just face it. We all know that the video game industry right now is in a very tough spot with a lot of people losing their jobs, a lot of studios getting shut down, a lot of projects getting canceled. So maybe this is one of those safe environments, if you will, that these developers, these junior people can actually come up and say, hey, I can direct this game without risk of losing my job if it doesn't go swimmingly. So, of course, from The Guardian, the game design secrets of Elden Ring's Hidetaka Miyazaki. And further down in the article, they talked to Miyazaki where he said basically, budgets, scale, and scope, everything that has grown to a point where room for failure isn't tolerated as much as I think it was in the past, he told me. FromSoftware has its own way of hedging risks, so to speak, in that most of our projects have a partner who's financing the project. From a business management perspective, we're not betting everything on any one single project. At the same time, you have to find the right project to allow for failure. Whether it's smaller in scope or scale, or it's a small module within something bigger, there needs to be room for that. I think that that's where a lot of young game directors will be challenged and will be able to learn from it. Making sure you understand and identify where those pockets of failure can be allowed is how we try to grow our talent. So absolutely, they are trying to use this game as a way to grow talent within the company. I can respect that. I can commend that. I have no problem with that. That doesn't mean that it isn't going to come across as lazy to some people, or a lot of people who are playing this game going, why am I playing the same enemies that I've played in Elden Ring and there's nothing different, there's nothing new, it feels like things are not better than Elden Ring, it's just the same thing, only treated a little differently. And why are you paywalling characters down the road, DLC, all that kind of stuff? I understand that there's a lot of complaints about it. That being said, I still think it's a game that I'm interested in. I'm still planning on checking it out down the road. I probably won't do it right now just because I got so many other games to play. But I don't have any issue necessarily with what they're trying to do with this game. I do think, again, that there's a fair criticism to be had that if it was a different studio, a different company trying the same thing, reusing assets and flipping essentially assets to make a multiplayer online live service game, that would be an argument you could make, is what's the difference between these guys and FromSoftware? Well, I think the difference with FromSoft is the fact that there's so much trust with these people versus companies like Ubisoft. But at the end of the day, if you're looking to pick up the game, you can go check it out on Instant Gaming. Use my link down in the description below. It helps the channel out. It'll save you some money. You can save a few bucks on either the original or deluxe edition. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Alright, and if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you for being here. I do have two channels, Minimal Effort Podcast, as well as my gaming channel. I do have a Twitch and Kick for my gaming channel. We do live streams over there occasionally, maybe once a week. And then if you are in the market for a new PC, make sure to check out Meta PCs. Click the link I have down below. Use code TBO at checkout for a special discount. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.